Over the past 6 years, we've helped over 100 B2B companies with their marketing. But unfortunately, marketing is only one part of a successful go-to-market strategy. So we ended up creating the B2B go-to-market happiness matrix, which we're going to run through today. Now, the point of this matrix is to help companies diagnose where the wider business issues may lie. And over the years, we've seen the first-hand knock-on effect of missing each one of these components, which we're going to run through today. So let's jump in and break it down. So as you can see here, we have the B2B go-to-market happiness matrix. And at the top, we have everything which hopefully should be included from a very top level to make sure that you have a great go-to-market strategy. So that's obviously good product or service, clear positioning, set KPIs, marketing strategy, the tactical side, which is the marketing execution, and sales alignment. And today I want to run through ultimately what happens if you're just missing one of these pieces of the puzzle, and then on the right hand side, the impact this has had potentially on your company's success and why you may not be where you want to be right now, and ultimately how you can identify which one of these you may actually be suffering with as well. So let's jump straight into it. And if we go on to the first one, which would be lack of good product or service. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this because this is the fundamental of any business, making sure your product or service doesn't suck. But the way in which you can recognize this and everything else is good and this potentially is missing is that you've got really high churn. For example, there's no amount of good marketing which can combat a really bad product, because people will sign up, you'll onboard them, and then they'll end up leaving in the first few months because it's not quite fulfilling what it is that you promised, or it's not as good as they thought it may be. So churn's a massive one, and that's definitely something that marketing can't cover over those cracks. And the next one is social proof. If you're really struggling to get social proof and really having to chase people, even though that is part of the social proof game, you're going to have to ask people a few times, because even if they love your product, it's still going to be headspace for them to sit down. But if you have really sporadic and no one really knows what to write about your product, it's probably a good idea to really reflect and try and work out how you can create that feedback loop with speaking to your customers and working out steps forward to actually make it resonate and become something which is a bit more sticky versus something which is, a high churn. The next one is clear positioning. Now, I'm not going to get too much into sort of the mechanics and the strategy of positioning, but ultimately, we come across a lot of companies that within that market, their target audience market will be everyone. So they say, we're a good fit for everyone across the board. And unfortunately, even if you have the biggest budgets and you're the biggest company in the world, this is going to become an absolute mammoth task. Now, one of the issues with poor positioning, even if you have everything else, like KPIs, marketing and sales all sorted out, is you're going to notice a few things. You're going to notice that everything is spread thin. So your budgets are going to be spread thin because you're competing across the board with every single company. Your consistency case study angles are going to be hard because with every new client, pretty much you're going to be solving a unique business case, which again is going to make your positioning work even harder. You're going to spread thin your sales resource because they're going to have to spend a lot more time qualifying, making someone's a good fit for your company before actually speaking with them, and also learning about their particular use case is going to become much harder as well. You're also going to have an issue with profit margin because typically companies that haven't got clear positioning race to the bottom, commoditized products. So ultimately, you're going to be competing with the big companies that are able to go with economies of scale. And finally, marketing resource is going to be thin. And it's something that we see a lot with our company is if people don't have clear positioning, every time they see a new shiny audience they want to go after, that they're going to sort of infiltrate and be able to get really good, ROI off that audience. It just means you'll tack them on like, education, non-profits. Oh, we're going now down the tech sector. They'll all keep tacking on new audiences because you haven't got clear positioning. You'll keep putting new vertical messaging out there, and it's just, a way to welcome yourself being spread thin across the board. The next one is having set KPIs, and this is important both on a company and a marketing level. Now, a company without financial targets is never happy, and we've learned that the hard way. And their directive from their management team, marketing team is always going to be more. Even if the going is really good and you're getting loads of good results with them, they're always going to want more and more because if you haven't got, defined targets, how do you know when you've hit them? And unfortunately, when a company doesn't have defined targets, that bleeds over into the marketing, and their people gets pressure pushed down from the top, and they just say, okay, we need to make these marketing channels go further. We need more for less or more for the same, and we just keep squeezing and squeezing. And the problem with this then becomes there's blind growth for one, but the more tactical problem is you start over-indexing on channels and spending too much money that's necessary to get actually decent returns. So it's diminished returns on a channel like Google Ads, for example. Someone may want to double the revenue that you're generating from Google Ads, tomorrow. They say spend twice as much. Unfortunately, because of max impression shares and the amount of demand for a product varying and, average CPCs across different industries, it's going to vary. So you want to make sure that you actually have aligned targets for your business and then work with an agency or internally to make sure that you have a correct go-to-market tactical plan and you're not over-indexing on channels which may not be offering you the best return for that allocation. Also, if you want and you don't have a timeline on targets, you're also going to try and cut corners and do a lot more direct response, less brand building, all that stuff, which kind of doesn't work. So have set KPIs, and then bleeds from a company level into a marketing level. The next one is a lack of marketing strategy. Now, pretty much a marketing strategy is the process of working out the best way your company can amplify your competitive advantage to your target audience. And skipping this stage and diving straight into tactics at best allows you to create generic templated marketing, but more often than not, this kind of shows that people start creating marketing based off what your competitors are doing. I'm sure you've had a Slack message with someone say, look what these guys are doing, we should try something similar, and then that kind of being their marketing strategy. And the way in which you can identify this is because internally there's going to be loads of activity going on, there's going to be lots of chopping and changing direction. And if you haven't got a feedback loop implemented from a tactical perspective, which ties back into looking at your strategy and if that strategy is working, then that's going to be the clearest way to understand if you haven't got your marketing strategy and you're just sort of throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks over a long period of time. The next one is lack of marketing execution. Now, this comes in two forms. The first form is everyone talks about marketing theory and nothing ever gets done. It's always like, oh, I've heard about this thing on LinkedIn, let's go and implement this. Or I've heard about this thing. And you talk a lot about it, do a lot of planning. And then when it comes down to it, everyone's kind of bored of the idea. And we've seen that happen quite a lot. The next one is that tactics are implemented, but they're implemented poorly. And this is why it's important, again, to have a marketing strategy, because you're never sure whether it's the strategy that's failing, so your competitive advantage amplification that's failing, or whether it's actually the rollout and the execution of that marketing strategy that's failing. So make sure that you know. And the way to know whether your marketing execution is failing from a tactical perspective is that you have a strategy outlined which says we want to create activation through XYZ channels, amplifying this content. But you're not getting any new leads through anything that isn't referral based, or you have no idea where your leads are coming from, which again is a tactical failure of marketing. Those are the two main ways I'd recommend knowing if your tactical is not working. Now, finally, this is one of the biggest reasons we've seen over the time as well, is there's kind of, everyone talks about blah, 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 sales and marketing need to be aligned. That's relatively generic and sort of obvious advice, right? But I've kind of grouped a few things together here, and I kind of want to start with the sales not being aligned in this case, that they're not quite sure what the company's positioning is. So, for example, a lead may come in and you may be competing against companies or people who care, maybe price sensitive, maybe they're feature sensitive, maybe they just want credibility but are happy to pay more. You have to know, especially from performance marketing inbound leads, the fronts that you're competing on. And if sales teams don't know what fronts you guys are competing on and getting the best wins and feeding that back from either the marketing team or the sort of senior leadership team, then you're really going to start failing, and you could be getting loads and loads of relevant ICP focused leads, but not converting them into sales. The next one will be a poor or bloated sales process, or even being slow to respond. So by this, I mean, if a lead comes in and obviously if no one responds quickly, that's not good enough anyway. But if, say, for example, you have a bloated sales process, an ideal lead comes in, they said they want just a demo of your product, but you put them through sort of like a 30-minute qualification call and everything else, you can then start to lose leads and deals off the back of that process just because you have a rigid internal structure. But next thing from a sales perspective, I'd say that we see here is they don't give the right information within the CRM, so they can have leads coming through, but don't quite fill them out properly or allocate the correct value, whatever it may be. Then marketing can't use that as a way to re-upload that back into the native platforms to be able to work out what actually has been working. And the final thing I'd say, which is probably grouped under a few different categories here, but I'll put it under sales for the sake of argument. It's going to be around pricing and the deal structure. The amount of times this probably sits in the positioning one a little bit as well, from a messaging and price side of point of view, but there's a lot of times we generate these ICP leads and then their competitors are offering, 6 monthly contracts at a decent price, and then other companies will be offering like a 5-year take it or leave it deal, and they wonder why all these ICP relevant leads are leading to few sales, just because they're not quite sure the competitive landscape, or they're not showcasing their value in other ways which would qualify them to actually get that deal, or they're not feeding that back into marketing to say, actually, we don't want these types of customers that only want a short deal. So there's a lot of ways which sales alignment is actually going to be the bugbear for not being able to create the results that you want. But on this graph down here, if you look at the right hand side, this is ultimately where you're going to be able to see the impact that missing one of these core elements from your go-to-market strategy. There are a few other bits to go-to-market strategies, but from a top line, I think this is a nice sort of cheat sheet to take internally and work out where you guys aren't lacking. If you ever want to talk about marketing strategy, marketing execution, feel free to hit the link in the bio to go to Session Media, and we can sort of work through whether your execution or the strategy isn't working and any other bits which may not be plugged in correctly. And I've linked to a video here I think that you'll find super useful if you like this video as well. But until next time, guys, speak to you very soon.